There are government leaks, and then there's Trump government leaks. A journalist was accidentally added to a Signal chat group that contained the Defence Secretary, the Vice President, and national security figures who were discussing military strikes on Houthi terrorists in Yemen. JD Vance, the Vice President, raised objections when he argued they were not in American interests, saying, "I just hate bailing Europe out again." Simon Marks is LBC's Washington correspondent. The fallout from this leak, Simon, afternoon.
Absolutely massive, Tom. There's been a hearing up on Capitol Hill today in the Senate. It was previously scheduled before we learned of this astonishing leak yesterday. But we saw some of Donald Trump's top intelligence officials floundering under very critical question from hostile Democrats. Republicans on the committee, it won't surprise you, were largely supportive and mostly supine over all of this. But the hearing began with Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the committee, going after the CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who insisted that in the chat room he had done nothing wrong.
My communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
Well, we will make that determination, because if it's not classified, share the text with the committee.
And then Senator Warner turned his fire on another one of the witnesses today, Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence. She had real difficulty during the course of this hearing, and it began with this exchange with Senator Warner.
There was no classified material that was shared in that.
So then, if there was no
check.
classified material, share it with the committee. You can't have it both ways. These are important jobs. This is our national security. Bobbing and weaving and trying to, filibuster your answer.
It took him 3 goes just to get Tulsi Gabbard to concede that she had been in the Signal chat room. As you heard her say there was no classified intelligence that was shared within it. But by the end of the hearing, she was telling another Democrat on the committee, Senator Mark Kelly, that yes, absolutely targeting information against the Houthis had been discussed in that Signal chat that was being observed by Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. It appears to be Ms. Gabbard and Mr. Ratcliffe's contention that when Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, put that intelligence into the chat, he was at that very moment declassifying it. Whether that stands up to any scrutiny is very unclear.
And then there's the effect of reading this in European capitals, which shows that, to be fair, what the American administration senior officials say in public about European freeloading, they're saying behind their backs too.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an extraordinary exchange, that. So JD Vance, the Vice President, basically disagreed with the President's decision to greenlight these strikes on the Houthis, because he argued only 3% of the trade travelling through those sea lanes in the Red Sea ended up in the United States. 40% of it ended up in Europe. So he thought that this move would be seen by American voters as being supportive of Europe. And why would you do that at the moment when the Trump administration is arguing that Europe needs to take care of its own defence? Later in the chat, Stephen Miller, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, comes in and says, well, we'll just go to the Europeans after it's over and we'll ask them to give us some of the money back to offset the costs of all this. So that tells you just how mercantile their approach is to the concept of helping Europe out. And the other point, Tom, is that this is a nightmare for Whitehall and for Number 10, because the UK is part of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing group that brings together Britain, the United States, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. How can the Prime Minister imagine today that British secrets are possibly safe if they're being shared with this lot?
Downing Street say this afternoon that they will continue to share intelligence, but yeah, there will be eyebrows raised for sure. Simon, thank you very much indeed. Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent, live from DC as the cherry blossom blooms.